While the statement is great, and I think it'll be good enough to get things back on track, it's not a full-blown apology, and I suspect that there will probably be a call at some point between the two of them so Zelensky can do that privately.
The US Vice President's denied insulting the UK by downplaying its role in the American-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. J.D. Vance says he wasn't referring to Britain when he criticised the possibility of European troops in Ukraine. A 16-year-old boy has been killed in a shooting in South London. The teenager died at the scene near Stockwell Station this afternoon. Vatican sources say the Pope's still on oxygen but is off ventilation. The 88-year-old's continuing to rest in hospital after suffering breathing problems. And one of the biggest visitor attractions in Wales, Oakwood Theme Park, is to close with immediate effect. It opened in 1987 and was best known for its wooden roller coaster, Megaphobia. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 112 points at 87.59. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.20. LBC weather: rain pushing east across Scotland and Northern Ireland tonight. Dry for England and Wales and a low of -4. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
News that's breaking overnight, the biggest story chronologically, and it would appear that after that explosive confrontation in the Oval Office, we now hear President Trump has paused US military aid to Ukraine. A White House official speaking anonymously said, "We're pausing and reviewing our aid to ensure it's contributing to a solution." Jennifer's in Chiswick.
I think our government needs to stop pretending as if Trump is some sort of genius negotiator and Trump is basically on Putin's side.
And is in Basingstoke.
If Trump and Vance are so keen on getting peace, I've not heard one of them tell Putin to stop firing the missiles.
Graham's in Rugby.
I think it would move things forward if Trump and Zelensky and Vance apologise to each other privately.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. On the panel, sitting next to me is Josh Simons, the Labour MP for Makerfield. Next to him, Lord Andrew Robathan, Conservative peer, former Defence Minister and a former British Army officer. You can see why we wanted him on tonight, can't you? Next to me on my right, Jude Kelly, theatre director and producer, who's the founder of the Women of the World Festival. And next to her, Robert Shrimsley, Chief UK political commentator and executive editor for the Financial Times. Lots to talk about this evening. We'll spend probably the first half of the programme with questions on Ukraine and America and then widen it out into other things. But if you have a question for our panel, the number to call 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on that number, and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Stephen in East Grinstead. Stephen, very good evening. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Will Trump rue the day America's allies became economic and political enemies?
Well, of course, today, another spat between Trump and Justin Trudeau on tariffs, mildly entertaining though it was. But you just wonder, Robert Shrimsley, why Donald Trump seems to be so delight in picking fights with his allies.
Because he views dependency as a weakness. Because he only respects raw power, economic, military, technological, and that he believes in spheres of interest. He recognises China, Russia, maybe India, I don't know, and everybody else is up for grabs. It's a bit like the Roman Empire. You know, there are the small countries, and as long as they do what they're told, you can enjoy the protection of Rome, and if you're not, if you step out of line, you face the wrath of Rome. It's because they can be bullied.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, let's look at Canada as an example here, which... I don't know what the land border with the United States is, but it must be, 3,000 miles or something. Two countries have always had a good relationship. What's in it for Trump domestically to pick a fight with Canada?
Well, I mean, obviously the official causes are the issue of fentanyl crossing the border and illegal migrants crossing the border, but it is also about suborning them. It is about raw power. I really do think it is quite as simple as that. It is about setting raw power. We want this. We will do it. We have the power to take it. And of course, there is also the other point that in economic terms, Trump views any kind of trading deficit as a defeat. So all relations are a zero-sum game. There is no such thing as the broader economic interest, the broader diplomatic interest. It is this good for America? I mean, when he said he was America first, by golly, he meant it. And I think it is as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. George Simons.
Well, I don't think that it's the case, as Stephen sort of posits in his question, that America's allies are becoming their enemies. In the case of Britain, for example, we are the closest ally that the United States has, particularly in security and defence terms. And that is true today, and it was true 5 months ago, and it was true 2 years ago, and it will be true in 5 years' time too. I think there's a long history in America of thinking of tariffs as revenue raisers. There's an interesting early 20th century way in which US presidents essentially thought that one way to close difficult budget deficit situations, for better or worse, was by raising tariffs. And I think that's part of what's going on domestically, to your question to Robert. But the important thing is that Britain is not an enemy of the United States. Europe is not an enemy of the United States. And despite some of what's going on in public conversation about that at the moment, that will be the case in 4 years from now, just as it was the case 4 years previously.
But Ukraine is not an enemy of the United States, but Russia is. And yet, the way he's treating... this week, all he's done is criticise Zelensky, hasn't uttered a single word about the hundreds of drone attacks carried out by Russia on Ukraine on Saturday, Sunday and Monday.
I think that the Prime Minister was really clear in the House of Commons earlier this week and over the weekend that he believes that Donald Trump wants peace in Ukraine. And
at any price.
He doesn't. The Prime Minister never said that.
No, I know. I'm
saying
that.
You might be saying that, but I think that is, it's too early to tell exactly what will happen when parties come to the table, negotiate, and get towards a peace deal. But if the Prime Minister believes that Donald Trump sincerely wants peace, and that is his motivation for whatever he's saying and doing, and that's his primary goal, that is really, really important to go back to. And what that means for us is that the goal that we have, which is to see peace in Europe, to see sovereignty as a principle respected, to make sure that Ukraine can defend itself and that the security guarantee that underpins that defence of Ukraine is strong and clear, and that involves...
Three of those four things that you've just quite rightly mentioned, Donald Trump doesn't want.
Which three?
Well, the last three.
The Prime Minister's understanding as of yesterday is that the security guarantee that the United States should hopefully provide is still very much the goal of the conversations that the UK, that Europe, that France are having with the United States. And I think we pay somewhat too much attention to the latest tweet, the latest statement, the latest press release. And we will have to see how the negotiation goes. But the goal of the President of the United States, as the President has said it, and as the Prime Minister has told the House of Commons yesterday, is to get peace.
Okay.
Sorry, and just to pick up on one point from the question, if I may, which was, will Trump come to regret it? The one point to make is that, while Britain will not become an enemy of the United States, there will eventually be a cost if all of the nations of Europe come to view the United States as a chronically unreliable ally. And the one part of Trump's diplomatic thinking, which is to try and prise Europe apart a little bit and weaken it as a bloc, if the consequence of his actions is the opposite.
It's having the opposite effect.
Has the opposite effect.
Yeah, well, there are two things here. I think that, first of all, when he began to say over and over again that Canada was the 51st state, what could have been a joke was a deliberate act of serial humiliation. And he wants Canada to feel frightened. He wants Canada to feel weak. Why does he want to do that? Because he's a kleptomaniac, I think. I mean, I actually do believe... Josh, I think that the way the government is playing this is completely right at the moment. I think it's absolutely essential that we maintain the narrative that he wants peace, we want peace, we will all work in unity. That doesn't mean to say that I think that we can second guess in any way what Trump actually does want. And I think that this relationship with Canada is sort of signalling to all the the big men around the world, all the sort of strong men around the world, that if we wanted to, we could take Taiwan. If we wanted to, we could take Ukraine. If we wanted to, we could even take Canada. So there's a sort of dare going out, I think, between them all. Thank goodness Bolsonaro's not on his throne yet again. But, it's a feeling that they want to be bullies and that nobody is going to take any reprisals. So I feel very frightened for Canada's psyche at the moment. And of course, this is we're not discussing Canada very much because of Ukraine, but actually because it's a Commonwealth country, we actually are going to have to make some decisions, possibly at some stage, as to what is our relationship going to be with that foray on Trump's behalf.
Andrew Robathan.
Well, you'll understand that I'm not a huge fan of Keir Starmer. You will understand that without being too hurt. And I think he did a very good job in Washington. I think he came back with the right answers. Well done, him. Unfortunately, since he's been in Washington, the world has changed. And
a day is a long time in politics, Andrew.
As indeed Harold Wilson said.
No, he said a week.
Was it a week? I can't remember. Okay, I was there. You're too young. But what Josh just said is absolutely right, except the things have changed. And today, Trump has said he's not going to give any further aid to Ukraine. Now, that's a really, really big issue.
He hasn't said that. He's paused it. That's not the same as saying he's not going to give any further aid to you.
You can accept whatever you like. And one has to understand, as Robert was saying, one has to understand this is a man who is, everyone says he's a bit out of control. I just don't think he's able to be controlled by anybody. He's got this vote. He thinks he's away. I suspect the good British people of America, including a lot of very good Republicans who voted for him, will start thinking, actually, this man is away. I mean, he is away. You mentioned...
You mean away with the fairies?
He's away with Putin, I think. And one has to ask, why is he so fond of Putin? Why has he not mentioned Bucha? Why has he not mentioned the appalling atrocities that have been committed by Russian soldiers, which, back in the Second World War, and we're both a little bit young to remember that, the Russians were appalling, but they were at least on our side fighting the Germans. Now they've been attacking poor Ukrainian people, and we should, if you haven't read them, I'm sure you have, you should read some of those reports that come out, which are just absolutely ghastly.
Yeah, they're horrific. Rapes and capturing of children.
Yeah.
This is a horrific war that's being waged.
And all of the evidence is being collected. I spoke at a conference in Berlin last March, and I saw for myself what evidence they've collected. And if that ever comes to an international court, beware President Putin.
Well, I think beware President Putin, but also beware President Trump. What is it that President Trump thinks that Putin could do to him? I mean, that's a question you have to ask, who is benefiting from this, all this talk from Trump? And the answer is President Putin. But we know Putin is a nasty dictator. I mean, go back to Litvinenko in 2008, I think it was, or the Skripals in 2016, or wherever it was. Go and see what Putin has been doing over the last 20-odd years. In fact, I'm going to go and read that book, Putin's People, again, to see what it says about Trump, because apparently there's quite a bit in there.
Come back?
I think sometimes when we read the latest statement or tweet or decision from President Trump, we get a little bit too distracted by focusing on what's motivating him, what's his psychology, what's he going to do next, almost commentating and anticipating where he's likely to be, and a little insufficient time thinking about what it means for us and for Europe and for the United Kingdom. And one of the things that I think is not that different from now versus 24 hours ago is Europe needs to take its own defence seriously, far more seriously than it has done for many decades. The United Kingdom needs to take its defence more seriously than it has done for decades. You saw that in the decision to get to 2.5% of GDP and then 3% of GDP at the end of the next parliament. But more fundamentally, we have to reorient what we are doing, as a government and as a country, around the need to defend not only our island, but also Europe. And that really serious implication of the world that we now live in, that kind of quite bold response to the insecure world we live in, that is the crucial takeaway from the last several weeks. And that has not changed in the last 24 hours.
Well, I think it is. But if you genuinely believe that 3% of GDP by the end of the next parliament is going to be sufficient, I would suggest that it'll need to be double that.
And I've been boring the world to bits for anybody that wanted to know for the last 10 years that we need to spend more on defence. We have to spend more on defence. There's no option. I was kicked out, put on a list by Mr. Putin that I can't go to Moscow back in 2015, which was a bit ahead of the game, actually.
What had you done?
I think I said he was showing signs of aggrandizement in Crimea or wherever it was after 2014 invasion. But we have to take this seriously. He is not to be taken. We cannot dismiss this, and we are looking. Look, when I was in the army back in the 1970s, before somebody here was born, probably you. There were 50.
You keep talking about how old you are.
I'm very, very old.
It's okay.
There were 55,000 troops, British troops, pointing east against the against the Warsaw Pact. We had squadrons of aircraft, and that was the Brits alone. We had Americans, we had Germans, we had French, whatever. Now we've got almost 55,000 troops, full stop, in the UK, and that includes people with 2 crutches and that sort of thing. So we've got to realign ourselves, and actually we have to start talking about spending the same sort of money we spent in the Cold War, which was 5-6%, whatever it might be, because otherwise we'd be spending 50% as we were in the Second World War.
Well, I think one of the things that Trump had said long ago was that unless we put more money into NATO, he was,
and he was right on.
And he was right. So, one of the things I would disagree with is that he's out of control. I would say the opposite. I would say he's very in control. We just can't believe what he actually wants to do. But that's not the same as him being out of control. And I think that he's pushing the boundaries on all fronts to say, if I want to reorganise the world order, I will do it. And if Putin wants to, he will do it. So I actually think he identifies with power brokers, which is really what Robert was saying, and that actually he wants to demonstrate that there are only a small number of major nations, and they should determine the world, and everybody else needs to fall in behind that. And if we're going to protect ourselves, we have to spend more on defence hugely, which is something I never thought I'd hear myself say. Well, 5 years ago anyway.
And I do think we have to just slightly question the notion that he's out of control. One of the other things that happened today, which maybe not everyone's noticed, is that a consortium led by the American company BlackRock has now acquired the ports on either side of the Panama Canal. So it will now have an American corporate ownership. It's bought it off of the Hong Kong owners. And this is Trump. And one of Trump's other points was that he wanted to take the Panama Canal back. And in a sense, this has happened. Now, if it's back in American corporate ownership...
Well, I look forward to hearing George Osborne talking about that, because an advisor to BlackRock.
The fact is that his strategies across the board are mostly working. The only area where I think there is real doubt about what he's pursuing and his intent is the impact on the markets of his tariff proposals, because the markets are one area where he can't control, he can't control. And we've seen today significant sell-off and a significant reaction to the tariffs.
OK, we will take more of your questions in just a moment here on LBC. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
90 minutes past 8. Our panel consists of Jude Kelly, theatre director and producer, who's also the founder of the Women of the World Festival. Just explain to our listeners what that is in case they don't know.
Well, they're celebrations of everything that girls and women do and they are in many, many parts of the world, 71 different parts of the world across 6 continents. I started it 15 years ago when I was at the South Bank Centre. We're celebrating our 15th birthday, in fact, at the Royal Albert Hall.
So you basically go to 71 parties every year, guaranteed.
Absolutely. And it's in all different kinds of places: Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Turkey, America, etc. I mean, the one in America is going to be very interesting in April, because obviously it's a very, very significant shift in terms of attitudes to women, apart from anything else. But yeah, they're very celebratory, very inclusive. We love men. Men are involved.
Thank goodness for that.
Thank goodness for that. Yes.
Robert Shrimsley is next to you. He is a man. He's chief UK political commentator for the Financial Times. We have Josh Simons, Labour MP for Makerfield, and Lord Andrew Robathan, Conservative peer. Right, let's go to our next caller. It's Wesley in Gravesend. Hello, Wesley.
Hello, Ian. Hello, panel. My question is, what does the panel think of Kemi Badenoch's comment in support to what J.D. Vance said today?
Now, she's basically said this morning that she knows J.D. Vance quite well, and when asked if the US Vice President had indeed insulted British veterans, replied, "I've looked at the comments. I don't think he actually said that. A lot of people are getting carried away." By contrast, Nigel Farage said that J.D. Vance is wrong, 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 wrong. Josh?
Well, I've not seen Kemi Badenoch's comments until he just read them out, but it smacks of the same thing that, frankly, I think most of us who've watched the House of Commons or been in the House of Commons have seen of late, which is a sort of desperation. She is clearly worried about Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, and clearly keen to signal to those online, on Facebook, on X, on other social media platforms who follow the sort of online world that J.D. Vance is such an integral part of, that she too gets it. And she's part of the crowd and she's on the in, and so they can trust her to be a bombastic Conservative leader that they have long been seeking. And to react to anything that even has the hint, that is even understood by the public to be a criticism of British armed forces in that way, seems to me a huge error. The job of a politician is to be really clear that they respect and are grateful for those who serve and who risk giving up their lives to defend our democracy and our country. I represent many people who have served in the armed forces and are still serving in the armed forces. I'm grateful for what they do. And that is, frankly, the only thing that an elected politician of the United Kingdom should be saying.
Andrew?
Well, I was careful not to criticise Starmer too much. But since you make the point, I mean, 3% by the end of next year, is it the year after that? Completely hopeless.
3% by the end of the next Parliament.
Whatever, completely hopeless. And also, of course, relying on GDP means that if GDP goes down, the amount goes down. I mean, it should be on what we need, not anything else. So let's leave politics out of it. I think Kemi Badenoch, actually, she went on and said, as I understand it, she said that she wished that people stop tweeting about everything they've read in the newspapers after 5 minutes. Because actually there's a lot of unhelpful comments being made.
She's not averse to the odd tweet herself.
Sounds like she's repeating the premise.
Fun enough, I don't really do tweeting. You'll be surprised to hear that, won't you?
I know. I tried to promote the programme today and looking for your Twitter feed, and there wasn't one. Robert?
I think she, to be fair to her for a moment, I think she is actually attempting to learn some of the lesson that the government is pursuing, which is let's not get sucked into every single spat. It doesn't do us any good. It doesn't help in any way. As it happens, this was the one she could have done, as Farage showed. Actually, this was about an apparent insult to British troops, which was sufficiently severe that even J.D. Vance himself felt the need to walk it back a couple of hours later. Whether or not he meant it, I'm not quite sure who the other 20,000 troops he could have been referring to were. But nevertheless, it was a bad thing for him to say. She could have criticised it. But I think what it really shows is that she hasn't found her touch at all. And a broader political point, I think she is still trying to work out how to navigate the task of being leader of the opposition. It's a very, very difficult job. She doesn't have that many people around her. They don't have much money at this party. She doesn't have many seasoned advisors. And I think she's still trying to work it out. And unfortunately for her, she's outflanked in Nigel Farage by someone who most of the time, he hasn't been his greatest week, but most of the time has a much surer touch.
Are we judging too early, though, given that she's only been leader for 3 months? I mean, you look back to when
prime ministers that have lasted less long.
Well, I know, but you look back to when Margaret Thatcher became opposition leader, and it took her probably a couple of years to get into her stride. Even then, she always had voices off.
It's a fair point. And actually, if we looked at Keir Starmer in his first year as leadership, there were an awful lot.
He nearly quit, didn't he?
A lot of criticism of him.
I
think it's legitimate to say one shouldn't write her off too early. There is time, but politics comes at you a lot faster these days. And there are others in her party, most obviously Robert Jenrick, who quite clearly has a stronger sense of what he wants to be, what he wants the party to be, what he is about. And it's showing her up consistently. You're right, we shouldn't write her off, but it's been an inauspicious start.
But I do think that she is trying to row back from the image that she's an angry, shouty sort of person, because anybody, and particularly women, and particularly black women, have that over their heads, and it's really difficult to deal with. So I think that she's trying to be moderate, and I think she's actually, in a way, trying to follow Keir Starmer's lead and say, anything we can do to take the temperature down with our allies, let's do it together. So I actually thought it was the right sort of move, but she hasn't got the deftness of ability yet to do that with finesse. And so it looked a bit weak, and it looked a bit inconsequential. And so obviously Farage has managed to kind of dive in there. But I do want to say something in defence of her against Farage, because Farage made a massive own goal, I thought, recently, because, when they said, Trump's a very old-fashioned man and he loves people to wear suits and this is why he was so cross. What about, Elon Musk with his baseball cap and his kid on his shoulder in the Oval Office?
And trainers.
And trainers. I mean, he didn't seem to mind that. So I think that Nigel Farage isn't to be trusted in terms of his instincts either.
Right, let's squeeze in another question before the news. Andrew in Fulham has sent a text question in saying, should the Ukrainian people vote on any peace deal through a presidential election? I wonder what Mr. Trump's view on that would be. Jude?
Well, it has been thought, hasn't it, that one of the reasons that they set him up in the office to have a row with him and bully him that way was because they were sort of almost trying to disgrace him in front of his own people in order to try to kind of flip it towards an election. And I think that is still a possibility, that they're trying to get Zelensky out via a public, refusal to have him anymore as the president. And I think that would be a terrible circumstance if the Ukrainian people sort of went and voted for peace by getting rid of him, even though he's offered himself up, hasn't he, almost? He said, if the consequences of getting peace is that I step down, then I will do that.
But see, this is part of the Russian propaganda that's being perpetrated at the moment, where if you look on Twitter, you would believe that Zelensky was the most unpopular person in Ukraine. Yet you look at the opinion polls that have been taken, and he would win a presidential election by a country mile.
Of course.
It's also, I'm not sure that you could hold a reasonably fair election while the country is at war.
Well, that's why they're not doing it, isn't it?
Electoral rolls and whatever. It's not a simple thing. The Ukrainian people will have to have a vote at some point in the future once peace returns, but not before.
Josh?
Imagine if the French people were telling Britain when they should hold their elections midway through the Second World War. How would we feel about them dictating to us exactly how our democracy should operate?
People say that the Americans had two presidential elections, one before they got into the war and one just before it ended. But of course, they weren't the ones being invaded.
Quite. And also, the Americans have a codified constitution that makes not having elections impossible. That is not the same as most democracies in the world, including Ukraine. It is a matter for Ukrainian democracy, for the Ukrainian people, and for the Ukrainian elected political leadership to decide when and how they have elections and to conduct those elections free and fairly, not the UK government, not the UK citizenry, and not anyone else.
No, I think, I'm glad to see we agree, Josh. This is ridiculous. We can't possibly have an election with half Ukraine occupied, the other half under bombardment half the time, and it doesn't work that way. And we didn't in 1940, whenever we had the elections immediately after VE Day, before VJ Day. So, that's the way it works in these things. But this is, I think you're absolutely right. I think Trump is trying to put him on the spot. And he has said he'll stand down. But actually, we need to have
he said he'll stand down if Ukraine can join NATO.
Yeah, whatever it was, yeah. But you know, we don't want... Let me put it this way. Ukraine and the West wants to have a strong Ukrainian government. I think he is pretty strong by all accounts. In fact, I'm going to a meeting with the ambassador tomorrow. You might be going in Parliament. And he's, we've got to get this straight. We have to get it straight. And the idea that an election will be the answer is bonkers.
Right, we will move on to other subjects in just a moment. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 8:30, time for the news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Volodymyr Zelensky has called his meeting with Donald Trump at the White House last week regrettable. The Ukrainian president says his country values America's support after the US president suspended military aid to Kyiv. A murder investigation has begun after a 16-year-old boy was shot dead in South London this afternoon. So far, no one's been arrested after police were called to a road near Stockwell Tube Station. A man's been charged with murder after a woman's body was found in Swansea. Leanne Williams, who was 47, was found at home in the Town Hill area last Thursday afternoon. LBC weather: rain pushing further east across Scotland and Northern Ireland tonight. Dry for most of England and Wales and a low of -4.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:33 on LBC. Let me reintroduce our panel to you. Josh Simons is Labour MP for Makerfield. Where is Makerfield?
Wigan.
Wigan.
I'm so glad you asked, because no one ever does. Makerfield
is it actually a place or a sort of... Because
it's the name of an ancient woodland that stretched from Wigan to Warrington.
Sounds idyllic.
And bizarrely, for reasons that... So there are 3 towns, Ashton, Makerfield, Ince, Makerfield, and for some reason, they decided to name the constituency that, despite the fact that there are essentially 4 towns in the south of Wigan, some of which have that suffix. But it's in the Domesday books as a forest, and its population is recorded as being inside the forest.
Everything you never wanted to know about Makerfield in 30 seconds.
Wigan South is how
Andrew Robathan is a Conservative peer, former Defence Minister and former British Army officer. Robert Shrimsley, Chief UK Political Commentator for the Financial Times, and Jude Kelly, the theatre director and producer. And used to run the South Bank Centre, didn't you?
I did, yeah, for 12 years, actually. Yeah. Yes, wonderful place, absolutely
wonderful job to have as well. Right, let's go to a text question from Juliet in Edgware. Scientists say that more than half of the people in the entire world will probably be obese or overweight in 25 years' time. What can be done to prevent this from happening? Now, the report published in The Lancet warns that based on current trends, by 2050, 3.8 billion people around the world aged 25 or older will be overweight or obese, while 746 million of those aged under 25 will be overweight or obese, making up a third of all children and young people. Let's go to the thinnest man on the panel, Josh Simons.
Oh, Ian, it's the nicest thing you've said about me ever, I think.
It gets worse.
I'll come to you next.
It worries me this hugely, and I think there's a real risk that the way we deal with it is to focus on the behaviour of individual people and blame them, essentially. 25% of kids in my constituency aged about 4 to 5 are overweight, a quarter. I'm hosting a coffee morning in a couple of weeks with kids of about that age.
No cakes.
Good question. And those kids, there's no moral failure on their part. Those kids are not indulging.
No, there's a failure on their parents' part.
There's a failure of society and what they eat. And I really think that the way that food has changed is extremely important here. Someone in my family has become obsessed with what he now calls UPFs, ultra-processed food.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Right, so he said to me, you should really cut out ultra-processed food. As a politician, you'll probably get fat, so get ahead of the curve, cut out ultra-processed food. I have tried, and it is very time-consuming. The amount of time that you can spend looking at the back of packets and working out what is ultra-processed food and what isn't ultra-processed food, Googling it and so on. And it is also expensive. The time it takes for me to buy some broccoli, some carrots, some chicken stock, chop them all up, put them together with some onions. I have 2 young kids. When I get home from work, I am exhausted. The idea that I will then spend half an hour chopping vegetables, another half an hour boiling them into some nutritious soup, and then we will all eat. By that time, the kids are screaming, they've probably taken themselves to bed. It's just not going to happen. And that's me. I'm an MP. I have a relatively easy life compared to much of the population. So I do think that looking at the way that food is designed, manufactured, sold to people, marketed to people, making sure that we tax soft drinks in the way that the government now has, making sure that junk food is not advertised at children, are really important ways of making sure that essentially the diet that our nation grows up on is not packed full of sugar and ultra-processed food, rather than saying, if only you spent a little bit more time chopping broccolis and onions, you'd be fine.
Andrew?
Well, I agree with Josh up to a point, I'm glad to say. I mean, I agree that we do need to work on food intake and people need to understand this. But I also think individual responsibility is hugely important. I'm afraid it is parents that and I understand, look, they're busy people. And by the way, they're fed all this garbage and things like LBC and so on, told they've got to eat this.
Beg your pardon.
Told to eat this or whatever it may be. But that's fair. But actually, in the end, it's picking up the right thing. And look, we discussed my age already. I'm 73, all right? But I'm still not too old and not too fat, let's put it that way, because I work at it. And actually, I see in Parliament, on both sides of the House, but I see in Parliament people who are meant to be setting an example and they should bloody well lose some weight. As simple as that. If you're meant to be setting an example, lose some weight. And you can do it quite easily by eating less and drinking less.
And I know an MP who came into Parliament at roughly your age, Josh, and 20 years later, shall we say he's probably about double the size that he was then. So let that be a warning to you.
I'm on the case.
I'll tell you who it is in the break. Jude?
Well, I think processed food is a killer. I think it's, a long-term killer in the way that cigarettes are. And I think that Josh is right. Actually, if you look at the stress of the working week for most people, they when they go to a shop, actually it's very hard for them to buy anything that is going to be quick enough to cook, that isn't processed. So, and when I go to...
because both... I mean, if there are two parents, they're both out working, which was not the case for Andrew when you and I were kids.
Economically, they have to both be working, pretty much. And the children are also at breakfast clubs, which also give processed food. And they're, my grandkids go to school, and I can see that they're not always eating healthily, even at school, after club and all these sorts of things. So I think, and when I travel around the world, go to places like Samoa or Japan, their diet has changed completely because of processed food, and they're doing huge harm. So I think we have to have a global idea about the way that processed food, like nicotine, is something which is harming the world's health, and we need to do something radical about that, not just put it back onto people's individual families' lives and say, try and sort it. They won't be able to sort it by themselves.
Robert?
Well, since I am overweight, I suppose I'm the last person to lecture everybody else. But I agree with all the things that have been said here. The one thing I would add, if there were easy solutions, we'd have found them already. The one thing I do think would be valuable is to teach children to cook at school. I remember when I was a child, only girls were taught to cook. They had home economics classes, boys were never taught. But actually, it strikes me that it would be something very useful if schools taught everybody a few basic recipes and the basics of how to cook and fend for yourself in that way.
Is that why you think you're a bit overweight, because you didn't cook?
No, I'm overweight because I'm greedy.
I don't think you're overweight. I think you just look like a rather nice teddy.
I'm not overweight, I'm just too short.
Oh, dear. But, when I was at school, there were domestic science lessons. Admittedly, boys didn't do them in those ages, but I think after I left, they did start doing them.
Well, I think they turned it into... It was actually, I think home economics was an actual O-level, as we called them in those days. I think that's a silly way of going about it. I just actually... Life skills of that sort are the kind of things that would be valuable to teach at school, and you could teach nutrition and meal preparation and that kind of thing, and I think it would be valuable down the line.
Joseph says on the text, yay, something else to thank the Americans for, processed food. Did they come from America?
A lot of it did.
Yes. It did.
Fast food, absolutely.
Right, now we can squeeze in one more question before the 8:45 break. Sharon in Dartford says, a Home Office minister says his own family told him not to hold his phone while walking down the streets in London because it'll get nicked if he does. Why has this problem got so bad? Lord David Hanson said he'd never thought about the risks of having his phone stolen until his children advised him not to use it in the street. He told peers that measures like CCTV cameras and tougher penalties for thieves will help reduce phone thefts. The Independent has found that at least 83,900 phone thefts were recorded across England in the year to last July. Now, this happened to me about 5 years ago. Somebody just swiped it out of my hand. And I had an email from a listener, because we did a phone-in on this recently, and I had an email from a listener in Thailand who said he booked a holiday to come to London, and as a result of that phone-in was going to unbook it because he thought London was too dangerous. And I said, no, it's really not like that. Please don't do that. Jude?
Well, I went to see Oliver Twist the other day, and, watching the little creatures belonging to Fagin, all nicking pocket watches and handkerchiefs. And 'twas ever thus. You carry something valuable, you make it available to people, and they're going to nick it. That's not new, is it? If you go through a situation where people are short of cash, nicking things becomes more prevalent. We're seeing that in shoplifting as well. I've had my phone taken out of my hand by two guys on a motorbike. It was frightening and nerve-wracking, and I was furious. But it was sort of my fault. We are carrying around expensive kit, and if I was travelling around with a camera around my neck or something, or a gold pocket watch, I have to accept the fact that people, certainly in the centre of London, are looking for things that they can steal.
It's also because we're oblivious to the rest of the world when we're looking at our phones, isn't it? We don't sense people around us because we're so zoned in on the phone.
I'm not exonerating thieving, don't get me wrong, but I am simply saying I'm not sure I was so surprised. They're expensive pieces of equipment that can easily get sold.
Andrew?
Two issues. First of all, of course, you're quite right, they're expensive pieces of equipment. Second of all, you must be an idiot to walk down the street with your telephone in your hand. These £100, £200, £300, £400, whatever they're worth.
But if you're trying, well, that's what I was doing. I was looking at Google Maps to try to get to my destination, and I happened to be standing. I was standing on the edge of the pavement, and this motorbike came along, and off it went.
But where I differ from you,
so am I an idiot? Am I an idiot?
Are you asking me a serious question? Anyway, what I would say, I would disagree with you is, these are not poor people that are stealing telephones. These are people that are making a lot of money out of it.
No, you're probably right. Yeah.
And I would say that, unfortunately, under the last government, under this government, we're not catching nearly enough of them, because actually, if you catch a few, guess what? It becomes less attractive to other people.
Well, and also the police don't take phone theft seriously.
No.
My new podcast partner, Tessa Dunlop, she had the same thing happen to her, and her 16-year-old, she said, right, let's track where this phone is. And they followed it. They were on their bikes, and they then went to the police and said, the phone is there. no interest whatsoever.
Don't get me going.
Josh?
This is one version of a problem that comes up in my constituency. I hold coffee mornings every month. I usually get about 100 people through the door. I had one 3 days ago. I spent almost 3 hours talking about antisocial behaviour of various kinds. Theft on the street was one, dirt bikes, really loud bikes going through the centre of town and then around fields out the back of the towns themselves. Kids who are, aggressively haranguing people who go in and out of shops. This is the lived experience.
Makes mental note, never move to Makerfield.
I think it's lovely.
As I suspect you don't follow rugby league.
I don't.
If you did, you would have seen that Wigan Warriors coach was asked on TV. An American commentator said, "You ever been to an area as mad as Las Vegas?" And he said, "Have you been to Hindley?" Which is a town I represent. The town centre of Hindley is wonderful and on the up. However, there is a feeling among people who walk from their houses to the town centre perpetually of the kind of edge of violence and threat and theft and degradation. And we have to restore the feeling of order and sanitation to our public realm. We have to have people who live in towns in this country feel pride when they go into the centre of those places rather than feel ashamed of them, because it is a fundamental part of rebuilding trust, respect, social inclusion, all things that we care about, that our public spaces are places that people want to be in again.
And you're quite right, but absolutely right, a lot of issues. But one of the issues is I'm afraid the police are no longer the bastion as they used to be of looking after public order as such. I'm just, okay, you can say I'm an ex-soldier, of course, but actually I see some of these officers with their hair down over their shoulders, looking as though they've just been, some sort of party. They don't look good. It's not a help. We should have people that are really respectful and polite. And call people, by the way, sir and madam.
And those were the thoughts of 73-year-old Lord Andrew Robathan.
Agreed by a lot of people, I'll bet.
I've never seen that policeman with his hair down.
No, I have to say I haven't.
At the gates of Parliament, if you want.
Right, we will take more questions in just a few moments' time, including our much anticipated fun question for the end of the programme. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Sun, wasn't it?
Right, Josh Simons. I don't know if you heard Andrew Robathan just say, page 3, that was the Sun, wasn't it? So it's Andrew Robathan, Josh Simons, Jude Kelly and Robert Shrimsley with us. Rob in Birmingham says, the government's new plan for neighbourhoods will involve money being given to broke local authorities to spend the cash in their local areas on what they want to focus on. Is this just Boris Johnson's Levelling Up Fund with a new name? And why can't we just stop local councils all going bust so they can actually deliver good local services for us? So £1.5 billion will be shared around 75 different communities across the UK to spend on cultural services such as youth clubs or community programmes linked to health and education. Let me issue a warning on this. 2 weeks ago, I visited my friend Jackie Smith in Malvern, and we went to see one of LBC's listeners, actually, Terry from Bournemouth. He's a Meatloaf impersonator, and he was absolutely brilliant. The show is called Back into Hell, should you want to see him elsewhere. He's in Maidstone on June the 14th, I think. And Malvern is a very rich area, lovely town. Not good enough for Makerfield, I have to say, but nearly on that level.
One day.
And they have this magnificent theatre complex, very modern. And Malvern, from the Levelling Up Fund, got £20 million to improve this theatre. And I'm thinking, who on earth... I mean, Harriet Baldwin, the local MP, must be the most brilliant lobbyist. But £20 million for Malvern when you have... What was it? Hindley, did you say? Hindley, in your constituency, needing money to revive its town centre. I mean, it's appalling.
Right. And not only that, the money tended to go to these town boards that had their own neighbourhood plan, thereby completely circumnavigating all the structures of English government, essentially. Quite often, therefore, meaning that people locally had very minimal... So let me take a specific example. Another wonderful town that I represent, Ashton, got £7 million from the Levelling Up Fund. That money had a set of very strict conditions that it could be spent on: plant pots, benches, shop fronts, whatnot. And the things that people wanted that money to be spent on bore almost no relationship to the things that they were told by Whitehall that it had to be spent on. It seems insane to me that that is a theory of how you generate growth and jobs and security across the United Kingdom. It has to be done through structures of local government where people can actually vote and have control over it, and it has to be done for things that are not simply aesthetic beautification projects that Whitehall thinks are good.
Robert?
I think there are two different parts to the question. I think the idea of giving councils some money to improve their local facilities seems a reasonable thing to me. They've been cashed off. But I think the second part of the question was about all these councils going bankrupt. And one of the reasons they're going bankrupt is because the enormous obligations that are placed on them by statute, which they can't meet. I mean, if you look at the extraordinary cost of special educational needs provision or of social care, which are loaded onto councils, and that in many cases simply don't have the money to meet their obligations, which is why they're scaling back almost every other service, from rubbish collections, other things, to pothole repair, that we haven't funded local government properly. And in the periods of austerity, that's been an area that governments have cut because it was easy, it seemed invisible. And then towards the end of the last government, you did see them being allowed to raise more money through council taxes. But they're in dire financial straits. They've been forced to go into all kinds of bizarre financial engineering. I think it was Spelthorne Council that got involved in some terrible land deals which bankrupted them, or nearly bankrupted them. So councils haven't been funded properly is the simple answer. The reason they're going bankrupt is because we're asking a lot of them and not being prepared to pay for it.
Well, I'm currently working with the 7 mayors of the North. In fact, I was just in the convention of the North in Lancashire, going through Wigan, actually.
I should have stopped you.
I meant to. And those 7 mayors and the other combined authorities have a kind of way now, maybe, of thinking about how to move away from this kind of bankruptcy issue of local government by bringing together, much heftier power. If the spending review and the devolution process works well, there will be much more opportunity for them to make local decisions, which I think is needed. There'll be much more opportunity for them to work cross-regionally and put their economic power with each other. And I'm working on a particular project to do with the creative industries across the north, looking at how we can get sort of additional economic value from them if all the mayors work together. So I think that the days of, the individual local authority having to pick up all of this burden by itself, I'm hoping that's going to go away and that you're going to have much bigger groups of local power, but with much better settlements from a central government.
Andrew? Yeah, I think, going back to what Robert was saying, I think there's been a huge amount of stress put on finances of local government. In particular, I think social care, which they've got to pay for, which is, of course, enormous and growing. And don't ask me to debate that at the moment. We need another 2 or 3 hours, I think. But there's a huge amount put onto them. I also think they can be not always very efficient. Talk to me about potholes in Leicestershire, and I'll talk to you about the chief executive of Leicestershire, who tells me that I must be wrong when I burst a tyre in Leicestershire. And of course, Leicestershire should pay for a burst tyre. People should know that. And then perhaps they might fix the potholes, of which the last government gave them quite a lot of money. I think this government's given them money too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, the thinking of it. But whatever it may be, local government is, of course, not always well run. Sometimes it is the same as central government. Sometimes well run, sometimes bad. But I think we need to help them. I like your idea of greater 7 cities together. I'm not, although it's probably not the Conservative line, I'm not opposed to having one single authority rather than as we have. Here we have Westminster City Council and the London Assembly, God save us. But we also, in Leicestershire, who knows about, do you know about Blade District Council? I didn't think so. Who knows about all these small district councils? Exactly. Whereas actually one single council...
So you agree with Angela Rayner's policy then? Because
no, I didn't say I agreed with anything that Angela Rayner said.
Well, no, that's her policy though.
It was our policy back once as well.
She's taken it over. Anyway, let's take another question before we finish. Anonymous text question. There is finally some focus today on just how much abuse we give school head teachers, or the abuse that they get from parents. 85% of us, in fact. Do you agree with me that parents just expect too much from their children's school? You mentioned bad parenting earlier. Well, the National Association of Head Teachers Trade Union has revealed that 85% of its members across England and Wales and Northern Ireland have been verbally abused by parents over the past year, while 2 in 5 of those who took part in the survey even had to ban offensive parents from the school site in that time. I don't know how old your children are, whether you're an abusive parent, Josh?
I hope not, but I am a parent.
I don't mean towards children. I mean towards... Sorry, I'll shut up.
No. Quite a direct question to ask me on national media, but no.
Are they watching?
They'll be in bed, all being well, although we have just let my son out of his cot and into a bed, and so he's perpetually running around at 4 a.m, since you asked. I think head teachers have incredibly difficult jobs, and I go to usually a primary school in my constituency pretty much every other week, and I do hear from head teachers a lot that parents and what they get from parents are an exhausting management part of their job that they didn't have to do in the past in quite the same way, and that frankly they could do a little bit less of and do a better job for the children. So I do think it's a problem. It's a problem I hear on the ground all the time. I think...
Sorry, I've got to ask you for brief answers on this one, because we're going to run out of time. It's not just the head teachers; it's the teachers in primary schools. A friend of mine is attacked every week by like a 5-year-old.
This goes back actually to what we were saying about people taking responsibility and showing some responsibility. What do parents think the teachers are doing? They're not always right, but actually they have to give them a little bit of leeway. And if there's a big problem, go and see the teacher. But don't attack somebody who's trying to do a decent job.
Robert.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think clearly it also sets a very bad example to your children.
It's some parents, isn't it? It's not all parents.
Yeah. Well, it's 85%, judging from this survey.
But I think being attacked by parents, it means lots of different things. Some parents are very demanding about what the academic achievements of their children should be. Some parents are abusive because their kids have been, taken out of school. There's all different versions of it, isn't it? But what we're definitely saying is that parents feel entitled now to demand things of education, where they used to be quite docile in a sense. And that's probably gone too far, because I don't think that parents are necessarily taking part in school by joining governing bodies or whatever. They just want to have their say, but not necessarily take any responsibility.
Well, it's apparently 85% of head teachers, not parents, so I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think Jude is right, by the way, that it is a small minority of parents giving a lot of grief.
Yeah. And also, I think the fact that in Germany, teachers, certainly head teachers, are really respected.
Yeah.
I mean, they're equivalent to civil servants in Germany. Here, we've never respected the teaching profession. It is a profession, and we should get that into our heads. Now, our fun question from Kerry and Hull. Scientists are experimenting with genetically modifying mice to make them woolly, which could lead to the mammoth returning from extinction. If you could revive any living creature or inanimate object, what would it be and why? Robert?
Well, I think on the basis of the events of the last few weeks, I'd bring back Harry Truman.
Or indeed any other American
Lincoln
president.
would be okay too.
Jude?
Well, that's posed a question, doesn't it? Should we bring back Shakespeare, to see whether he could write the political tragedies and comedies of the current situation? I think we'd all like to see Shakespeare back, wouldn't we, and see what he'd make of the current situation. Oh, come on. And we wouldn't write in iambic pentameter.
That's
We'd
all right,
write
then.
in modern verse now.
That's all right.
It'd be fine.
I'm convinced now. Josh?
Well, we sat down a couple of weekends ago and watched the old Shrek with my kids, not quite realising that the new Shrek was about to come out. And I saw an image of the new Shrek and was horrified at what they'd done to the old Shrek. So I would 100% bring back the old Shrek.
Well, having talked about mice, I wondered if you were talking about the Houses of Parliament, because there's a lot of mice there, I know. But actually, after what we've been discussing, my view would be we should get hold of some small children of 50 years ago who are young and fit and whatever, and rebirth them so that we get lots of young, fit children now rather than fat children. We've been talking about them.
So you're talking about rebirthing yourself?
Can I have one more choice? I want to just say for my grandchildren, let's revive one dinosaur, because the whole world of children will be so excited.
You've never watched that programme, have you?
I have Jurassic Park, of course, but we just have one. Just the one.
A little one. Right, tomorrow, thank you very much indeed to all of you for coming on the show tonight. The former Conservative MP Tracy Crouch, Dame Tracy Crouch, will be on the programme tomorrow. Labour MP Natalie Fleet, The Spectator's political journalist James Heal, and the historian Dr Tessa Dunlop, who's soon going to be my co-host of the brand new Global podcast where politics meets history. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of Donald Trump, Ukraine, because overnight Donald Trump announced that he was going to abandon all military aid to Ukraine, even weapons that are on the Polish-Ukrainian border will not cross that border. I want to ask you what effect you think that's going to have on Ukraine's prospects of victory in this war. What challenge does it lay down to Europe? And does this mean that effectively he's guaranteeing Putin a win? 0345 6060 973. That's the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.